You are awake again, not because you need to be, not because there's something urgent waiting in the dark. You're awake because wakefulness has become your default state, a low hum beneath everything, a background radiation of partial attention that never quite resolves into sleep or full consciousness. You reach for your phone without thinking. The screen illuminates your face in that particular blue-white glow that has become the light of our era, the light by which we read our lives. The notifications are there, of course. They're always there. Messages that aren't quite important enough to have woken you, but significant enough to pull at the edges of your awareness. You scroll through them with a practiced thumb, processing and dismissing, each swipe a tiny decision that adds up to nothing in particular. Somewhere in another room, another screen is probably still on, casting its own glow against a wall, playing content to an empty room because you forgot to turn it off, or because the algorithm decided you might come back, or because the idea of silence and darkness in every corner of your home feels somehow wrong now, too complete, too final. You put the phone down, pick it up again, put it down. The room around you is dark, except for these devices, these portals, these windows that don't look out onto anything real. And you feel it, don't you? That particular loneliness that has nothing to do with being alone. You could message someone right now. You could video call a friend on the other side of the world. You could join a community of thousands discussing anything, everything, the minutiae of hobbies or the depths of philosophy. The connected world promised you'd never be isolated again. Yet here you are, isolated in a way that feels more profound than simple distance. Isolated in your own illuminated bubble, one of millions of bubbles, each person backlit by their own screen, each face underlit by that same pale glow, all of us connected and none of us quite reaching each other. The loneliness isn't in the absence of contact. It's in the presence of so much contact that means so little, that dissolves as soon as it arrives, that asks nothing of you and gives you nothing you can hold. You've felt this before, this restlessness. It's not new tonight. It's the same restlessness that pulled you to your phone in the first place. The same formless anxiety that makes you check email at midnight. Refresh feeds that haven't changed in the 30 seconds since you last looked. Click through stories of people you barely know doing things you don't particularly care about. You're looking for something. You don't know what. Everyone is looking for something in these little screens, and nobody seems to find it. And still we keep looking because what else is there to do with this feeling, this hunger that has no name? The experts call it connection deficit, or attention fragmentation, or a dozen other clinical terms that try to wrap language around something that feels too slippery for words. But you know it's simpler than that and more complicated at the same time. You're homesick. That's the word that comes closest. Homesick for a place you've never been, for a time you never lived through, for a way of being in the world that you only know through its absence. You're homesick for a home that might never have existed the way you imagine it. And yet the ache is real, the longing is real, the sense that something has been lost is absolutely real, even if you can't quite articulate what that something was. Sometimes you catch yourself romanticizing the past in ways you know aren't fair or accurate. You imagine a time before all this connectivity, before the endless scroll, before you had to curate a public version of yourself for invisible audiences. You imagine it must have been simpler, easier, more authentic somehow. But you're not stupid. You know the past wasn't paradise. You know that people in every era have felt displaced and anxious and uncertain. You know that nostalgia is a trick, a beautiful lie we tell ourselves about yesterday to make today more bearable. And yet there's something underneath the romanticization, something real that you're circling around, something about the quality of connection itself, the texture of belonging, the way humans used to gather and be together, that feels fundamentally different from the way we gather now. It's not that people were happier then, it's that they were placed. They had a spot in the world, a physical location where they belonged, where they were seen and known, where their presence mattered in ways that were immediate and tangible and real. You think about this sometimes when you're lying awake, scrolling through the feed. You think about what it might have felt like to live in a world where the people you saw every day were the people you would see every day for the rest of your life, where the square of your village or the street of your neighborhood contained most of the human contact you would ever have, where belonging wasn't something you had to constantly negotiate and perform and maintain through digital presence, but something that simply was, as fundamental as the ground beneath your feet. The thought makes you uncomfortable because it sounds claustrophobic, limiting, provincial. You value your freedom. You value the ability to connect across distances, to learn from people you'd never meet otherwise, to become whoever you want to be without being trapped by the circumstances of your birth. And you wouldn't actually want to live in that older world with all its constraints and hierarchies and lack of choice? You know this. You remind yourself of this. But still, in the dark, with the screen glow making your eyes ache and your thumb cramping from the endless scroll, you feel it. The hunger for something more solid, more present, more warm. You remember, or think you remember, or imagine you remember, moments of real gathering. Family dinners where people actually talked instead of checking their phones under the table. Evenings with friends where you weren't half aware of what was happening elsewhere, what you might be missing, who might be messaging you. Moments of full presence that feel increasingly rare, increasingly precious, increasingly impossible to recreate or sustain. And sometimes, just sometimes, you have this vision, this half dream, this imagined scene that comes to you in the space between sleep and waking. You see a village square at dusk. You see lanterns being lit as the sun goes down. You see people gathering, not because they planned it on a calendar app, not because they coordinated through group chats, but because that's what people do when the day's work is done. Because that's where everyone goes. Because the square is the heart of the village and the lantern light is warm. And you don't need an invitation to belong there. You just do. By virtue of being alive, by virtue of living in this place, you belong. The image is almost certainly fantasy, certainly oversimplified, certainly leaving out all the hard parts, the politics and gossip and constraint and judgment that would have come with that kind of tight-knit community. But something in you reaches for it anyway, reaches for the warmth of that imagined light, the simplicity of that gathering, the uncomplicated fact of belonging. This is what keeps you awake tonight, not the scrolling itself, but what the scrolling represents, the searching, the reaching, the endless attempt to find through these glowing screens what you suspect can only be found in proximity and presence, and the kind of unhurried time that seems to have evaporated from the world. You're looking for the lantern light in the village square, and all you're finding is the blue glow of information that means everything and nothing, that connects you to everyone and no one, that fills your time and leaves you empty. You put the phone down again. This time you mean it. This time you're going to sleep. But the glow from the other room still bothers you, and you get up to turn it off, and on the way, you check your phone one more time, just in case, just to be sure, just because the pull is so strong and the habit is so deep, and the hope that this time, this refresh, this scroll will give you what you're looking for dies hard. It won't, of course. It never does. But you're not quite ready to accept that yet. None of us are. So we keep looking, keep scrolling, keep searching for something that might not exist in the places we're looking, while the memory of a different kind of light, a different kind of warmth, a different kind of gathering pulses beneath it all like a heartbeat, like a song we can't quite remember the words to, like home. Let's go back then. Not to escape, but to understand. Not to find answers, but to sit with the questions. Let's go back to the village square at dusk, to the time when lanterns were being lit and people were gathering, and see what was actually there, beneath the romance, beneath the longing, beneath the golden haze of nostalgia that makes the past glow warmer than it ever actually was. The first thing you need to understand is that the darkness was real. Not metaphorical darkness, not spiritual darkness, but actual physical darkness of a depth and completeness that you, in your electrically illuminated world, have probably never experienced. When the sun set, the world went dark. Truly dark. The kind of dark where you couldn't see your hand in front of your face if you stepped away from the fire or the lamp or the candle. The kind of dark that wasn't romantic or cozy, but dangerous, disorienting, and full of real threats both imagined and actual. In that darkness, light was precious, not in the abstract way we use the word now, but in the concrete survival level way that makes you understand why almost every culture's mythology treats light as sacred, why fire was the first technology, why the person who tended the flame had status and responsibility and power. Light meant safety. Light meant warmth. Light meant the ability to see threats coming. Light meant you could continue to be human after the sun went down, could continue to work and talk and eat and live instead of just huddling in the dark waiting for dawn. So when the lanterns were lit in the village square at dusk, it wasn't an aesthetic choice. It wasn't ambience. It was necessity transforming into ritual, the practical act of illumination becoming something more, something communal, something that marked the transition from the working day to the evening hours, from individual labor to collective rest. The lamplighter, if the village was large enough to have one, or simply the first people to arrive at the square, would light the lamps as the sky turned from blue to purple to black, and the light would pool in that central space, and people would come. They came because there was nowhere else to go. That's the first truth we need to sit with. They didn't have the option of staying home in their own private entertainment bubble, their own carefully curated environment of streaming content and social media and infinite choice. Most homes were small, dark, cold in winter, stifling in summer, shared with too many people in too little space. Privacy, as you understand it, didn't exist for most people. Solitude was something that happened during work, during the long hours in the fields or the workshop, not something you sought out for restoration or retreat. So they came to the square because the square was where life happened in the evening hours, where you learned the news because there was no other way to learn it, where you conducted business because there was no other time or place to do it, where you found out who was sick, who had died, who had given birth, who was getting married, who was in a dispute with whom, what the harvest would be like, what the Lord or the church or the government had decreed, what strangers had passed through, what rumours were travelling up the road from the city or the next village over. The gathering wasn't optional, not really. It was the social fabric, the information network, the entertainment system, the support structure, the surveillance apparatus, all rolled into one. You came to the square because not coming would mean disconnection so complete it would endanger your survival. You needed to know what everyone knew. You needed to be seen by everyone who mattered. You needed to maintain your place in the intricate web of obligation and reciprocity and reputation that held the community together. And here's where it gets complicated, where the nostalgia starts to fray at the edges. Because yes, there was belonging. Yes, there was connection. Yes, there was a kind of deep, sustained, multi-generational continuity of relationship that most of us today can barely imagine. But the price of that belonging was conformity. The price of that connection was surveillance. The price of that continuity was the near impossibility of change, of growth, of becoming anything other than what your birth and your family and your village expected you to be. Everyone knew you in the village square. They'd known you since you were born. They'd known your parents, your grandparents, possibly your great-grandparents. They knew your family's reputation, your family's debts, your family's feuds and alliances and history going back generations. When you stood in the lantern light, you weren't just yourself. You were the inheritor of all that history, the current manifestation of a bloodline, a role in a story that was much older and much larger than your individual life. This gave you a place in the world, yes, but it also constrained you in ways that could be suffocating. If your family were farmers, you would be a farmer. If your family were craftsmen, you would be a craftsman. If your family were poor, you would almost certainly be poor. If your family had a shameful secret, that shame would mark you too, regardless of whether you had anything to do with it. The community that gave you belonging also watched you constantly, judged you constantly, measured you against expectations you had no part in creating and little power to escape. The lantern light was warm, but it exposed everything. There were no secrets in the village square, no privacy, no room for the kind of individual reinvention that you take for granted today. Everyone knew your business because everyone's survival depended on knowing everyone else's business. The cooperation required to get through winter, to bring in the harvest, or to build a barn, or fight a fire, or survive a plague meant that individual privacy was a luxury the community couldn't afford. So let's sit with this contradiction for a moment. The same forces that created deep belonging also created intense constraint. The same transparency that fostered trust also enabled control. The same continuity that gave people a sense of place in the world also locked them into places they might have desperately wanted to leave. The village square at dusk was a site of warmth and connection, yes, but also of judgment and gossip and the slow, grinding pressure of communal expectation. The people gathering there weren't necessarily happy. They weren't living in some pre-modern paradise of authenticity and presence. They were tired, probably. Most of them had worked from dawn until dusk. The physical labor that wore down the body in ways that would leave them crippled by middle age if they were lucky enough to reach middle age at all. They were hungry, probably, because food was scarce and uncertain, and the difference between enough and not enough was often measured in weeks, in the time between now and the next harvest, in whether the winter would be mild or harsh, in whether disease would come to the livestock or the children. They gathered in the square not because it was a choice, but because it was what you did, because the alternative was isolation that felt like death, because humans are social creatures who need other humans even when those other humans are difficult or demanding or disappointing. They gathered because the lantern light was better than the darkness. Even if the lantern light revealed as much pain as comfort, as much conflict as harmony, as much suffering as joy. And yet something happened there in that gathering, in that regular, repeated, ritualized coming together, in the same place at the same time, that created something real and sustaining and important. Something that we, for all our connectivity and technology and choice, seem to have lost or at least misplaced. Something about the quality of presence, the depth of continuity, the unmediated reality of being in a body, in a place with other bodies in the same place, sharing the same air, the same light, the same moment in time. The conversations in the village square weren't profound, probably. They were mundane. Talk about weather and crops and animals and tools and children and food and work. The same conversations repeated with minor variations day after day, season after season, year after year. Boring by the standards of your information-saturated life. Tedious even. The same people saying the same things about the same topics in the same place over and over again. But that repetition created something. It created a shared narrative, a collective story that everyone was part of, that gave shape and meaning to the passage of time. The seasons weren't abstract concepts marked on a digital calendar, but lived experiences, remembered through these gatherings. Spring was when you talked about planting in the square. Summer was when you talked about the growing season. Fall was when you talked about harvest. Winter was when you huddled closer to the braziers and talked about enduring, about making it through to spring again. And the life cycle of the community was witnessed and marked in these gatherings. Babies were passed around, admired, blessed. Children were watched as they grew, their development tracked not through photos on social media, but through physical presence, through seeing them in the square week after week, month after month, year after year. Couples courted under the eyes of the entire community. Marriages were celebrated together. Pregnancies were noted. Births were attended. Deaths were mourned collectively. You belonged to something that was bigger than yourself, and that belonging was enacted through these regular gatherings in the light. Not chosen belonging, not curated belonging, not belonging based on shared interests or values or ideology, but simply the belonging of proximity, and of being alive in the same place at the same time as these other people who were also alive in this place at this time. It was almost biological, this belonging, as fundamental as breathing, as unremarkable, as necessary. The lanterns themselves became symbols, markers of continuity. The same lamps lit night after night, year after year, sometimes for generations. The oil changed, the wicks were trimmed and replaced, the glass was cleaned or broken and mended, but the lamps remained, fixed points in the gathering darkness. Children who had watched the lamps being lit as toddlers would grow up to light them themselves, would watch their own children watch the lighting, would pass on the simple, necessary ritual of making light in darkness, of creating a space where the community could gather. And the light itself was different. Not just dimmer than electric light, though it was that. Not just more flickering and uncertain, though it was that too. It was warm in a way that electric light rarely is. The color of flame, the color of the sun at sunset, the color of comfort and home and safety. It drew people in. You moved toward it naturally, instinctively, the way moths move toward flame, the way humans have always moved toward light in darkness. Under that light, faces became more visible as the sky darkened. Features illuminated from below, shadows pooling in different places than in daylight, everyone made slightly mysterious, slightly other, by the changing quality of illumination. The young and the old, the beautiful and the plain, the powerful and the weak, all gathered in the same light, all part of the same scene, the same moment, and the same community made visible by flame. There was a democracy to it almost. Not political democracy, not equality before the law, not anything like the rights and freedoms you understand today, but a democracy of presence. Everyone was there, in their bodies, in that place. The lord or the wealthy merchant might have better clothes, might have more deference shown to them, might have more power in every tangible way. But they were still there, in the same square, under the same lantern light, breathing the same air, part of the same gathering. They couldn't opt out entirely. They couldn't retreat to a private world of screens and carefully curated experiences. Their fates were bound up with everyone else's in ways that were immediate and inescapable. This created accountability, for better and worse. And the powerful couldn't entirely ignore the powerless when they saw them every evening, when they lived in the same small world, when their children played together in the square, when their lives intersected in 1,000 small ways every day. But it also meant the powerless couldn't escape the powerful, couldn't find refuge or alternative community, couldn't imagine a world structured differently because this was the only world there was, made concrete and real and inescapable by these daily gatherings in the light. The conversations, mundane as they were, created a kind of ambient knowledge about the state of the community. Who was struggling? Who was thriving? Who needed help? Who could offer it? You didn't have to explicitly ask for support when everyone already knew your circumstances, had watched them unfold day by day in the square. So you didn't have to broadcast your success or perform your happiness because everyone had witnessed your life, the whole messy reality of it, not just the curated highlights. This could be oppressive. The lack of privacy, the constant watching, the inability to separate your public and private self because you essentially didn't have a private self, not in any sense you would recognize. But it also created a safety net of sorts, a web of mutual obligation that caught people when they fell, because letting them fall too far would destabilize the entire system. The stories told in the square, the jokes and songs and gossip and news, created a shared culture, a common reference point that bound the community together. Everyone knew the same stories because everyone heard them told and retold in the square. Everyone laughed at the same jokes because humor was communal, performed and refined through repetition. Everyone knew the same songs because singing was a group activity, voices joining together in the lantern light, creating harmony that was both musical and social. This shared culture gave people a sense of continuity with the past and the future. The old people in the square were living links to history, to the time before, to the stories of grandparents and great-grandparents, to the way things used to be done. The young people were the future, the next generation who would carry these stories forward, who would light these same lanterns in years to come, who would gather in this same square and remember, dimly perhaps, the elders who are here now. Is you belonged to a chain of being that stretched back into the past and forward into the future, and the square at dusk was where that chain was made visible, where the living generations gathered together and enacted their connection to the dead and the not yet born. It was a kind of time travel, this gathering. The past present in the stories of the elders, the future present in the faces of the children, all of it held together in this moment, this evening, this light. But let's not forget the darkness at the edges. Beyond the pool of lantern light, the world was vast and unknowable and often threatening. The square was an island of light in an ocean of darkness, and that darkness pressed in, always, a reminder of how small and fragile this human gathering was, how easily it could be extinguished, or how much depended on the continued burning of these flames, the continued gathering of these people, the continued enactment of these rituals that held the darkness at bay. The darkness wasn't just physical, it was spiritual, existential, the void of meaninglessness that threatened when the structures that gave life purpose started to break down. The gathering in the square was an assertion against that darkness, a declaration that we are here, we are alive, we are together, and that matters, even if the universe is indifferent, even if death awaits everyone, even if hardship and suffering are inevitable. The lanterns said, we make light anyway. We gather anyway. We continue anyway. Not because we believe we can hold back the darkness forever, but because this is what humans do, have always done. We'll keep doing as long as there are humans to do it. We make light in darkness. We gather together. We tell the stories again. We sing the songs again. We mark the time, honor the seasons, witness each other's lives, create meaning through repetition and ritual and shared presence. And maybe that's what calls to you in the night, when you're scrolling through your phone, looking for connection in the endless digital scroll. Maybe what you're missing isn't the past itself, with all its hardship and constraint and lack of choice. Maybe what you're missing is that sense of being part of something larger than yourself, something continuous and sustaining, something enacted through regular, repeated physical gathering in shared space and shared light. The village square is gone, for most of us. That kind of tight-knit, geographically bound community is mostly a memory, mostly nostalgia, mostly impossible to recreate in our mobile, digital, globalized world. You can't go back. You wouldn't want to, not really, not if you're honest about what you'd be trading away. The freedom you have now, the choices, the ability to define yourself, to connect across distances, to access information and culture and ideas from across the world and across time. These are real goods, real freedoms that people in the village square didn't have and often desperately wanted. But you can understand what was lost. You can name it. You can recognize that the restlessness you feel, the loneliness in the midst of connection, the sense of being untethered and adrift. These aren't personal failings or chemical imbalances or problems to be solved with the right app or the right technique or the right amount of meditation. They're reasonable responses to living in a world that has traded one kind of connection for another, one kind of belonging for another, and hasn't quite figured out how to give you what the lantern light gave your ancestors. A place in the world, witnessed and known, held in a web of relationship that asked everything of you and gave you, in return, the simple, solid fact of mattering. The rhythm of gathering was tied to the rhythm of the sun, and the rhythm of the sun was tied to the rhythm of the seasons, and the rhythm of the seasons was tied to the rhythm of life and death and renewal. None of this was abstract. None of this was conceptual. It was lived in the body, measured by exhaustion and cold and hunger and relief, marked by these daily gatherings in the changing light. Winter evenings in the square were brief. People came quickly, huddled close to the braziers where they burned, faces ruddy in the firelight, hands extended toward warmth. The conversations were shorter, more practical. The cold drove people home earlier, back to whatever meagre heat they could maintain in their dwellings, back to the long darkness that dominated this season. But they came anyway, even in the bitter cold, because not coming meant isolation that was more unbearable than cold, meant missing the news or the gossip, or the chance to see other faces, hear other voices. Remember that you were part of something, even when the darkness and cold made it feel like you were alone in a hostile world. And spring evenings stretched longer. People lingered as the days grew. There was a lightness to the gatherings, a sense of survival, of having made it through another winter. The conversations turned to planting, to the work ahead, to hope measured in seeds and soil and the returning sun. Children played later in the square, running between the lanterns, their voices high and bright. A sound that marked the season as surely as the returning birds or the budding trees. Summer evenings were leisurely, almost languid. The square filled early and stayed full late. The heat of the day dissipated slowly, and people were in no hurry to return to stuffy homes when the square offered air and space and light. Young people courted in the shadows between lanterns. Old people dozed on benches, lulled by the murmur of conversation around them. The festivals happened in summer. The celebrations, the moments when the ordinary gathering became extraordinary, when musicians played and people danced, and the lanterns were supplemented with torches and bonfires, and the light pushed back the darkness further than usual. Fall evenings carried an edge, a reminder that the year was turning, that the long darkness was coming again. The conversations turned to preparation, to harvest, to the work of storing and preserving and making ready. There was often abundance in fall, the reward for spring's planting and summer's tending, but the abundance was shadowed by knowledge of scarcity ahead. The lanterns seemed more precious as the nights grew longer, the light more necessary, the gathering more urgent. This cycle repeated every year, every generation, for as long as anyone could remember. The square was constant. The lanterns were constant. The gathering was constant. Individual lives came and went, bloomed and faded, but the pattern persisted, larger than any single life, holding each life in a structure that gave it shape and meaning and place. You were born, and your birth was announced in the square. You grew, and your growth was witnessed there. You reached each milestone in view of the community. Your first steps, your first words, your first ventures into the larger world all happened under the eyes of the people who gathered in the lantern light. You weren't raised by your parents alone, but by the entire community. For better and worse, shaped by countless small interactions and observations and corrections and encouragements offered by people who weren't your family, but were part of your world simply by being there. By being present, by being part of the same gathering year after year. When you were old enough, you began to court, and your courtship happened partly in the square, under the watchful eyes of everyone who cared about either you or your intended or both or neither, but watched anyway because that's what people did. Your marriage was celebrated there, witnessed by everyone, blessed by the community, absorbed into the collective story. Your children were born, and the cycle began again. The same pattern, the same rhythms, your children's lives unfolding in the same square where yours had unfolded, where your parents had unfolded, where your grandparents had unfolded, back and back and back into the dimly remembered past. When you died, your death was mourned in the square. The community gathered to mark your passing, to tell the stories of your life, to locate you in the larger narrative, to say, you were here, you mattered, you were part of this, and now you are part of the past that we carry forward. And then life continued. The gathering continued. The lanterns were lit the next evening and the evening after that. And the world went on without you, but held your memory, held you in the collective story that was larger than any individual life. This continuity, this sense of being part of a story that transcended your individual existence, gave life a particular kind of meaning. Not the meaning that comes from personal achievement or individual distinction or unique contribution, but the meaning that comes from being a thread in a larger fabric, a note in a longer song, a life lived in relationship to other lives, in a pattern that was old when you were born and would continue after you died. It's hard to explain this kind of meaning to someone raised in a culture of individualism, of personal branding, of unique purpose and special destiny. It sounds passive maybe, limiting, like surrender. But for the people in the square, it wasn't limiting. It was liberating. You didn't have to figure out the meaning of life because the meaning was already there, was given to you by the community, by the rituals, by the regular gathering in the light. You didn't have to create yourself from scratch or discover your unique purpose or differentiate yourself from everyone else. You had a place simply by being born into this community, in this time, in this place. Your job was to fulfill that place, to play your role, to be faithful to the pattern. This could be stifling, yes. It often was. The person who wanted to be something other than what their place prescribed, who wanted to break the pattern or create a new one, often suffered terribly. The system had little room for deviation, little tolerance for difference, little patience for people who didn't fit. But for most people, most of the time, the pattern was enough, was more than enough, was everything. The rituals marked time and gave it shape. The gathering marked space and gave it significance. The community marked individuals and gave them identity. You knew who you were because everyone else knew who you were, had known your family, had watched you grow, had expectations of you based on your role and your history, and your place in the pattern. This wasn't the fluid, self-created identity you value today. It was fixed. I'd inherited, imposed. But it was also solid, reliable, real in a way that your carefully curated digital persona can never quite be real. When you stood in the square under the lantern light, you didn't have to perform yourself or prove yourself or constantly negotiate your place in the social order. You had a place. It might not be the place you would have chosen, might not be a place that allowed you to fully express whatever you might understand as your true self. But it was a place, and having a place, even a constrained one, even an unwanted one, was better than having no place at all. Better than the floating, rootless, constantly shifting sense of identity that comes from having infinite choice and no structure to hold those choices in meaningful relationship to anything larger than your own desires. The lanterns marked the center. The square was the heart. The gathering was the enactment of community, of continuity, of meaning created through repetition and witness and shared presence in shared time. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't paradise. It was often hard and sometimes cruel and always limited. But it was real in a way that so much of your life today doesn't quite feel real, doesn't quite touch you in the deep places, doesn't quite give you that solid sense of standing on firm ground, of being held by something larger than yourself, of mattering in ways that don't require constant effort or performance or proof. And that's what the lantern light represents in your imagination, in your nighttime longing, in your restless scrolling through screens that promise connection but deliver only more isolation. The lantern light is the symbol of a different kind of belonging, a different kind of meaning, a different way of being human in the world. Not better, necessarily. Not something you should or could return to, but different in ways that highlight what's missing now, what's been traded away in the exchange of one world for another. But let's be clear about what you're feeling when you feel this longing, this homesickness for the village square. You're not actually missing the past. You can't miss what you never had. You're missing something else, something the past represents, something about coherence and continuity and connection that the past had in ways we've lost, but also something that might be possible to reclaim or reimagine or recreate in new forms, if we can understand what it actually is we're longing for. The past wasn't better. It was harder. Life was shorter, more brutal, more bounded by circumstances you had no power to change. Disease took children regularly. Childbirth killed mothers. Infections that would be minor today were death sentences then. Hunger was common. Starvation was possible. Violence was part of life in ways that would horrify you. War could devastate a community in an afternoon. Justice was arbitrary and often cruel. Power was concentrated and absolute and could be turned against you for reasons that had nothing to do with anything you'd done. Women had almost no autonomy. Their lives were determined by fathers and then husbands and then sons. Their bodies controlled by men and by the community. Their voices silenced or ignored. Their potential wasted because half the human race wasn't allowed to develop or contribute or choose. The village square might have been a place of gathering, but it was also a place of patriarchy, where women's place was carefully circumscribed, where stepping outside those boundaries could mean social death or actual death, where the warm light of community was also the harsh light of judgment on anyone who didn't conform to gender expectations. If you were born into the wrong family, the wrong class, the wrong circumstances, your life was largely determined before you drew your first breath. No amount of talent or effort or desire could overcome the accident of birth. The butcher's son became a butcher. The farmer's daughter became a farmer's wife. The systems were rigid, the possibilities limited, and the opportunities for change vanishingly small. The continuity that gave life meaning also trapped people in roles they might have desperately wanted to escape. And if you were different in any way that the community couldn't absorb or understand or tolerate, if you loved wrong or thought wrong or believed wrong or simply were wrong according to the standards of your time and place, the community that gave others belonging could destroy you. The same forces that created social cohesion also created brutal exclusion. The same mechanisms that held people together also cast people out. The village square could be a place of warmth and welcome, but it could also be a place of shaming and shunning and violence against difference. You need to hold all of this together: the warmth and the cruelty, the belonging and the constraint, the meaning and the suffering. The past wasn't a simpler time when people were happier and life made sense. It was a different time with different trade-offs, different costs, different possibilities, and different limitations. Understanding this doesn't mean you can't feel the longing. It means you can feel the longing honestly without illusion, without pretending that going back would solve anything or that the past holds answers to problems it didn't even recognize as problems. What you're really longing for, what the lantern light really represents, isn't the past itself, but something the past had that we've lost. A way of being embedded in place and time and community that gave life a kind of coherence and continuity and collective meaning that's very hard to achieve in the modern world. You're longing for the feeling of being held by something larger than yourself, of being part of a story that stretches beyond your individual life, of having a place that doesn't require constant justification or performance or proof. This longing is real and valid and important. It's telling you something about what humans need, about what makes for a meaningful life, about the costs of the particular kind of freedom and choice and individualism that defines the modern world. But the longing can't take you back because there is no back to go to. That world is gone. The forces that shaped it, the constraints that defined it, the possibilities and impossibilities that structured it, these have all changed in ways that are irreversible. The lanterns in the village square are metaphors now, symbols, and pointers towards something that might be possible to recreate in new forms but can't be recovered in old ones. You can't unknow what you know. You can't unchoose the choices that have been made by you and by your society over generations that have created the world you live in now. You can't reverse globalization or uninvent the internet or return to a time when your world was small and bounded and everyone you would ever know lived within a day's walk of where you were born. But you can ask yourself what the lantern light represents. What is it about that image, that scene, that moment of gathering that speaks to something deep in you? What need is it pointing toward? What hunger is it revealing? And then you can ask, are there ways to meet that need, to feed that hunger, in the world you actually live in, with the tools and possibilities and constraints you actually have? The answer isn't to recreate the village square. You can't and shouldn't. But you might be able to create something that serves some of the same functions, that meets some of the same needs, that gives you some of the same sense of place and belonging and continuity that the village square gave to your ancestors. Not the same, never the same, but similar enough, resonant enough, real enough to quiet some of the restlessness, to ease some of the loneliness, to give you a place to stand that feels solid and sustainable and connected to something larger than your individual existence. This might look like showing up to the same place at the same time regularly, and creating your own ritual of gathering, even if it's just a weekly dinner with friends, or a monthly potluck with neighbours, or a regular presence at some third place that becomes yours through repetition. It might look like committing to a community, even an imperfect one, even one that frustrates you sometimes, and staying committed long enough that you become part of the story, part of the continuity, part of the pattern that holds others the way you want to be held. It might look like reducing the number of your connections to increase their depth, trading breadth for intimacy, choosing to know a few people well rather than knowing many people slightly, creating relationships that have the weight and substance and staying power of the relationships in the village square. It might look like getting off the screens more often, as creating boundaries around your attention, protecting time and space for the kind of unhurried, unmediated, face-to-face connection that the lantern light symbolizes. It might look like accepting limitation, choosing constraint, opting into obligations and commitments that reduce your freedom, but increase your rootedness. The village square worked partly because people couldn't leave, because their fates were bound together, because they had to figure out how to live together because there was no alternative. You have alternatives now, endless alternatives, and that makes it harder to commit, harder to stay, harder to accept the inevitable frustrations and disappointments that come with any sustained relationship or community. But commitment is the price of depth. Constraint is the condition of meaning. You can't have the belonging without accepting the boundaries. None of this is easy. None of this is a solution you can implement quickly or perfectly. The longing you feel is pointing toward needs that are real and deep and not easily met in the modern world. The structure that held people in the village square was the product of thousands of years of human society evolving in conditions of scarcity and danger and limited mobility. You can't recreate that structure by choice or will or intention. It emerged from constraints, and those constraints are gone, and that's mostly good even if it makes some things harder. But you're not helpless. You're not doomed to endless restlessness and disconnection and longing for something you can never have. You can make choices, small ones, daily ones. Might that move you toward the thing the lantern light represents? You can create your own rituals of gathering, your own practices of presence, your own commitments to community and place and continuity. It won't be the same as what your ancestors had. It might not feel as solid or as sure or as sustaining, but it can be real. It can be enough. The work is to understand the longing without being enslaved by it, to honor what the past had without romanticizing what it cost, to reach for connection and belonging and meaning in ways that are possible and sustainable in the world you actually live in. The lantern light is calling you toward something, but it's not calling you backward. It's calling you deeper, into presence, into commitment, is into the kind of showing up that creates community over time through simple repetition and shared experience and the slow accumulation of trust and knowledge and care. Let yourself imagine it one more time, but differently now. Not as nostalgia, not as escape, not as longing for a past that never existed the way you imagine it, but as a meditation, a way of understanding what you're reaching for, what you need, what might be possible if you can see clearly what the lantern light represents and what it doesn't. Evening is coming. The sun is setting somewhere it always sets, following the pattern it has followed for billions of years, will follow for billions more, indifferent to human concerns, to human meaning, to human gathering or dispersal. The light is changing from gold to amber, to rose to purple, to that deep blue that comes just before full dark. And somewhere, in some place you can barely imagine, people are gathering. They're tired from the day's work. Their bodies ache. They have concerns, worries, fears about tomorrow and next week and next season. They have conflicts with each other, resentments, old wounds that haven't healed and might never heal. They have constraints on their lives that you would find intolerable, limitations you would fight against, injustices you would name and resist. They are not living in paradise. They are living in the world as it was, as hard and unfair and often cruel as the world has always been. But they're gathering anyway. Because it's what you do when the work is done and the darkness is coming. Because being alone in that darkness is worse than being together despite all the difficulties and complications and frustrations that come with being together. Because humans are social creatures and we need each other, and we've always needed each other, and we will always need each other, even when we disappoint each other, even when we hurt each other, even when we fail each other. The lanterns are being lit. One by one, the flames catch, the wicks burn. The light pools and spreads and pushes back the darkness just enough to see faces, to recognize friend and stranger, to gather in something that resembles safety even if it isn't quite safe, that resembles home even if it isn't quite home, that resembles meaning even if the meaning is fragile and contingent and could disappear in a moment if the flame goes out. And they gather there, these ancestors you never knew, these people whose names are lost to you, whose individual lives have dissolved into the vast anonymity of the past. They gather and they talk about small things, ordinary things, the texture of daily life rendered into language and shared in the presence of others who understand, because they share the same small world, the same daily struggles, the same questions about whether there will be enough, whether we will make it through, whether tomorrow will be possible. And children play at the edges of the light, running between the lamps, testing the boundaries between light and dark, safety and danger, known and unknown. And old people watch, holding in their bodies and memories the knowledge of how many times this same scene has played out, how many springs have come after winters, and how many mornings after nights, how the pattern repeats and somehow sustains, somehow continues, somehow creates meaning out of repetition itself. And you, watching this scene from your impossible vantage point outside of time, from your place in the future they couldn't imagine and wouldn't recognize, you feel something. Not simple nostalgia, not uncomplicated longing, but something more complex, more truthful. You feel the ache of disconnection, yes. You feel the weight of what's been lost in the transformation from their world to yours. But you also feel gratitude that you don't live in their constraints, that you have choices they didn't have, that you can imagine and pursue possibilities that were foreclosed to them from birth. And yet, there's something in that scene, in that simple act of gathering in the light as darkness falls, that speaks to a need that's still alive in you, that hasn't changed despite all the changes, that remains human and essential and urgent. The need to be with others, the need to be seen and known, the need to be part of something larger than yourself, something continuous, something that gives shape and meaning to time. This need doesn't go away just because the village square is gone. It doesn't disappear just because you have screens and global connections and infinite choice. If anything, it becomes more urgent, more painful, more obvious in its absence. The more connected you are digitally, the more you feel the absence of connection physically. The more choice you have, the more you feel the burden of choosing, the anxiety of missing out, the fear that you're getting it wrong, that there's a better option somewhere else, that you're alone in your choosing in ways that your ancestors never were. They didn't have to choose their community. It was given to them by birth, by geography, by the immovable facts of their existence. They didn't have to choose when or where to gather. The square was the place, evening was the time, and that was that. They didn't have to curate their presence or manage their image or perform their belonging. They belonged by being there, by showing up, by being alive in that place at that time. And yes, this meant constraint. Yes, this meant limitation. Yes, this meant that people who didn't fit or couldn't conform or wanted something different suffered in ways that were real and terrible and unjust. You wouldn't trade your freedom for their constraint, your choice for their givenness, your autonomy for their embeddedness. You know this. You're clear on this. But you can still feel what was there, what the constraint made possible even as it foreclosed other possibilities. You can still recognize that the freedom you have comes with costs. That choice without structure can become burden. That autonomy without community can become isolation. You can hold both truths at once. That the past was harder in ways you wouldn't want to endure, and that it had something you need and don't fully have. Something about depth of connection and continuity of relationship, and the simple, solid fact of having a place in the world. The lantern light isn't calling you back. It's calling you to attention. It's asking you to notice what you're missing, what your restlessness is pointing toward, what your longing is trying to tell you. It's asking you to see clearly what you need as a human being, what conditions support flourishing, what makes for a meaningful life. And then it's asking you to figure out how to create some version of those conditions in the world you actually live in, with the tools and possibilities and constraints you actually have. This is the work, not to romanticize the past or escape the present, but to understand what humans need and have always needed, and to find ways to meet those needs in new contexts, new configurations, new forms that honor what was valuable in the old forms, without pretending we can or should return to them. The gathering in the light, the regular showing up, the witnessing of lives over time, the simple presence of bodies in shared space, creating community through repetition and ritual, the sense of being held by something larger than yourself, of being part of a pattern that transcends your individual existence, of mattering in ways that don't require constant proof or performance. These are possible. Not easy, not simple, not guaranteed, but possible. You can create them. You can choose them. You can commit to them in ways that might, over time, give you something of what the lantern light represents. Not the same, never the same, but real, sustaining, enough. Now, let the scene begin to dissolve. Let the specifics blur. You don't need to hold on to the details, don't need to grasp at the image of the village square or the lanterns or the gathering crowds. Let it all soften. Let it become impression rather than image, a feeling rather than fact, presence rather than picture. What remains when the scene dissolves is not the past, but the principle. Not the village square, but the human need it served. Not the lanterns, but the light itself. The simple fact that humans make light in darkness, gather together, create meaning through presence and ritual and the regular marking of time and space and season. This need doesn't belong to the past. It's alive in you now, in this moment, in your body, in your restlessness, in your reaching for your phone in the middle of the night, looking for something you can't quite name. The longing you feel is your body's wisdom, your deep self's knowledge that something is missing, something important, something that matters for your well-being and your wholeness and your ability to live a human life in human ways. Trust that longing, not by indulging nostalgia, not by wishing you lived in a different time, but by letting it teach you what you need. Let it point you toward presence. Let it guide you toward commitment. Let it draw you into the kind of showing up again and again in the same place with the same people that creates community over time, not through grand gestures or perfect solutions, but through simple repetition and shared experience. Your village square might be a weekly dinner table, might be a monthly gathering of friends, might be a regular presence at a coffee shop or a park or a community centre, might be a commitment to your actual neighbours, the people who live near you, whose lives intersect with yours by virtue of proximity, even if you didn't choose each other. Might be a decision to get off the screens and into the world, and into places where bodies gather and faces are visible, and voices are audible, and presence is actual rather than virtual. It won't be perfect. The people will frustrate you. The commitment will be inconvenient. The regularity will sometimes feel like obligation rather than joy. There will be evenings when you don't want to go, don't want to show up, don't want to be present. This is normal. This is part of it. Community isn't something that only happens when you feel like it. It's something that exists because you show up even when you don't feel like it. Because repetition creates relationship. Because presence over time creates the conditions for depth and trust, and the kind of knowing that can't happen in isolated moments or curated interactions. And slowly, gradually, through this showing up, through this committing, and through this choosing presence over endless possibility, you might find something of what the lantern light represents. Not the same, not a recreation, not a return, but something real, something sustaining, something that gives you a place to stand that feels solid beneath your feet. You might find that you're known by the people who gather with you. Really known, not in the curated social media way, but in the embodied overtime way that comes from showing up in your actual self, in your moods and your changes and your growth and your struggles, and being seen through all of it. You might find that you know others in the same way, that you can track their lives not through updates and posts, but through presence, through seeing them week after week, month after month, watching them change and grow and struggle and persist. But you might find that time starts to have shape again, that the seasons are marked by gatherings, that the years are measured by who's there and who's not, who's new and who's changed, what's grown and what's ended. You might find that you have stories in common, experiences that are shared, references and jokes, and memories that belong to this group, this gathering, this regular coming together in this place. You might find, in other words, that you've created a kind of continuity, a pattern that holds you, a structure that gives your life shape and your time meaning. Not the same structure that held your ancestors in the village square, but a structure nonetheless, human-made and human-scaled, fragile but real, contingent but sustaining. And on the nights when you're restless, when you're reaching for your phone, when you're scrolling through endless content looking for connection, you might remember there's a gathering, there's a place. There are people who expect you, who notice when you're not there, whose lives intersect with yours in ways that matter. You have a place in something larger than yourself, and that place exists because you and others have chosen it, have committed to it, have shown up for it again and again until it became real. This won't solve everything, won't cure the loneliness entirely, won't make the modern world less fragmentary or less overwhelming or less anxious, but it might be enough, might give you enough grounding, enough connection, enough sense of place and belonging to bear the rest. Might be the lantern light you've been looking for, made new, made yours, made possible in the world you actually live in. Let yourself rest now in this understanding. You don't have to fix everything tonight. Don't have to solve the problem of modern disconnection or figure out how to recreate community or commit to anything right this moment. Just let yourself rest in the knowledge that your longing is pointing towards something real, something important, something that matters. The restlessness you feel is not a personal failing. It's not something wrong with you that needs to be fixed or medicated or solved. It's your deep self telling you something true about what humans need, what makes for a meaningful life, what creates the conditions for flourishing. You're homesick for a kind of belonging that the modern world makes difficult, but not impossible. You're longing for presence and continuity and the simple, solid fact of having a place in something larger than yourself. This longing is precious. It's your guidance system, pointing you toward what you need. Trust it, not by escaping into nostalgia or fantasy, but by letting it guide you toward choices and commitments and ways of being in the world that might, over time, give you something of what you're reaching for. And when you feel the pull toward the screen, toward the endless scroll, toward the searching for connection in places that can't give you what you actually need, pause, take a breath, ask yourself, what am I really looking for? What would actually satisfy this hunger? What would actually quiet this restlessness? The answer probably isn't more information, isn't another video or article or post, isn't a better algorithm or a different platform or a more optimized way to consume content. The answer is probably something simpler and harder. Presence. Commitment. The regular gathering in shared space with actual people in actual time. The slow work of building relationship through repetition and showing up and being there, in your body, in your life, in your actual world. You know this already. You feel it in the longing for the lantern light, in the pull toward that imagined scene of gathering in the village square. Your deep self knows what you need. It's trying to tell you. The work is to listen, to trust, to act on that knowledge in ways that are possible and sustainable in your actual life. This might mean small changes at first. Saying yes to a regular gathering you've been avoiding, inviting people over with some regularity, showing up to a place in your neighborhood consistently enough that you become a regular, that people start to recognize you, that you start to recognize them. Small things, regular things, the kinds of commitments that create the conditions for community to emerge over time. It might mean larger changes eventually, choosing to stay somewhere instead of remaining endlessly mobile. Investing in your actual geographic community instead of focusing all your social energy on dispersed connections. Making choices that trade some freedom for some rootedness, some possibility for some depth, some breadth for some intimacy. Only you can know what's right for you, what's possible, what you're willing and able to commit to. But the longing is pointing you somewhere. The restlessness is trying to tell you something. The image of the lantern light in the village square, however romanticized, however impossible to recreate, is speaking to a need that's real and urgent and worth honoring. So honor it, not by trying to go back, but by going forward with understanding, not by romanticizing the past, but by recognizing what it had that you need and finding ways to create that in the present. Not by escaping your world, but by being more fully in it, more present to it, more committed to building the kinds of relationships and communities and patterns of gathering that might give you a place to stand, a place to belong, a place to be held by something larger than yourself. The lanterns are fading now. The scene is dissolving. The people in the square are becoming shadows, then suggestions, then memories, then less than memories. They're returning to the past where they belong, to the vast silence of all the lives that have been lived and are now over, all the gatherings that happened and are now finished, all the light that burned and has now gone out. But something remains, some principle, some understanding, some recognition of what mattered there and matters still. The human need to gather, the human impulse to make light in darkness, the human capacity to create meaning through ritual and repetition and shared presence in shared time. This hasn't changed, won't change, is as true now as it was then, will be as true tomorrow as it was yesterday. The forms change, The contexts shift, the specific practices and places and patterns evolve. But the need persists, ancient and urgent, woven into what it means to be human, to be social, to be a creature that survives and thrives and makes meaning through connection with others of your kind. You carry this need in your body, in your restlessness, in your reaching for connection, even in places that can't give you what you actually need. You carry the memory of the village square even if you never lived there. Carry it in your genes, in your nervous system, in the deep structures of your brain that evolved for community and presence, and the kind of sustained, face-to-face relationship that the lantern light symbolizes. And you can honor that memory, that need, that longing, by creating new forms of gathering, new rituals of presence, new patterns of showing up that might give you and others something of what the village square gave your ancestors. Not the same, never the same, but real enough, sustaining enough, art present enough to quiet some of the restlessness, to ease some of the loneliness, to give you a place in something larger than yourself. This is the work. This is the path forward. Not back to the past, but forward into a future where you understand what you need and create conditions for meeting that need in ways that are possible and sustainable in the world you actually live in. Forward into regular gatherings, sustained commitments, the simple showing up that creates community over time. Forward into presence, into your body, into your actual life with actual people in actual places. The lantern light is almost gone now. Just a flicker, a suggestion, a memory of warmth and gathering and belonging. But you don't need to hold on to the image. You just need to understand what it represents, what it's pointing toward, what your longing is trying to teach you. And then you need to rest, to let yourself be held by the darkness, by the quiet, by the stillness that comes when you stop reaching and searching and scrolling and just let yourself be. You're tired. You've been tired for a long time. Tired from the constant stimulus, the endless choice, the perpetual availability, the weight of maintaining connection across so many platforms and in so many ways that each connection becomes thin, becomes performance, becomes work. You can rest now. You can put down the phone. You can let the screens go dark. You can trust that the world will still be there in the morning, that the connections that matter will survive a night of absence, that you don't have to be always on, always available, always reaching for more. You can trust that you have enough, that you are enough, that the search for whatever you've been searching for in the endless scroll can pause, can rest, can wait until you've slept and woken and are ready to engage again from a place of wholeness rather than hunger. The darkness is not empty. It's full of possibility, full of rest, full of the restoration that comes when you stop producing and consuming and performing and just allow yourself to be, to sleep, to dream, to let your body do its work of healing and integration and preparation for another day. And tomorrow, or the day after, or sometime soon, you can begin, can make a small choice toward presence, toward commitment, toward the kind of showing up that creates community over time, can reach out to actual people, make plans for actual gathering, show up in actual space with actual presence, can start to build, and slowly and imperfectly, some version of what the lantern light represents. But not tonight. Tonight is for rest, for letting go, for trusting that you don't have to solve everything or fix everything or figure everything out before you can allow yourself to sleep. The longing will still be there tomorrow. The need will still be real. The work will still be waiting. But right now, in this moment, you can rest. Let the weight of your body settle into the bed. Let your muscles soften, releasing the tension they've been holding, the tightness in your shoulders and your jaw and your hands. You don't need to grip anything right now. Don't need to hold on. You can let go. Let yourself be supported by the bed beneath you, by the darkness around you, by the simple fact of being alive in this moment, in this body, in this breath. Breathe in slowly. Breathe out slowly. Notice the rhythm of your breathing, the way it continues without your effort, without your attention, your body doing what it knows how to do, keeping you alive, keeping you here, asking nothing from you except permission to rest. The lantern light is gone now, fully dissolved, returned to wherever images go when we stop imagining them. But the warmth remains, the sense of it, the feeling of it, the understanding of what it represented and what it was pointing toward. You can carry that understanding with you into sleep, into dreams, into the restoration that comes in the night. You're not alone in your longing. Everyone feels it. This restlessness, this homesickness for a way of being in the world that seems increasingly distant, increasingly difficult to access. Everyone is searching for something more solid, and more present, more warm than the blue glow of screens can provide. You're part of something larger than yourself, just in feeling this longing, just in recognizing the need, just in being human in a world that has changed faster than human needs can change. And that's enough for now. That recognition, that understanding, that simple acknowledgement that what you're feeling is real and valid and pointing towards something important. You don't have to fix it tonight. Don't have to change everything or commit to anything or figure out the perfect solution. You just have to rest, to sleep, to let your body and mind do the work of restoration they can only do when you stop trying to control everything and just allow yourself to be. The village square is quiet now. The lanterns have been extinguished. The people have gone home. The night is dark and still and peaceful in a way that the endless scroll can never be. And you can join that peace, can let yourself drift into the darkness, into the quiet, into the stillness that holds you without judgment or demand or expectation. You belong here, in this moment, in this darkness, in this rest. You belong simply by being, simply by breathing, simply by allowing yourself to stop striving and searching and reaching and just be present to what is. The work of building community, of creating presence, of finding your place in something larger than yourself, that work can wait. It will still be there tomorrow. But right now, you can rest. Let the thoughts slow down. Let the images fade. Let the worries and plans and concerns drift away like leaves on water, moving away from you, becoming smaller and less urgent, finally disappearing into the darkness. You don't need to follow them. You don't need to hold them. You can let them go, trusting that the important ones will return when you're rested and ready to engage with them. Breathe in, breathe out. Feel the rhythm steadying, deepening, slowing. Feel your body becoming heavier, more relaxed, more ready for sleep. You're safe here. You're held. You're exactly where you need to be, doing exactly what you need to be doing, which is nothing at all except allowing yourself to rest. The lantern light was a guide, a pointer, a symbol of something you need and can find. But you don't need it anymore tonight. You can let it go. Let it fade into memory, into dream, into the deep wisdom of your body that knows what you need even when your mind can't quite articulate it. You can trust that understanding to work on you in sleep, in dreams, in the mysterious processes of restoration and integration that happen when you stop trying to control everything and just allow yourself to be. So rest now. Sleep now. Let go now. The village square is quiet. The lanterns are dark. The gathering has ended. And you are held by something larger than yourself. Held by the darkness. Held by the quiet. Held by the simple, ongoing fact of existence, of breathing, of being alive in this moment, in this body, in this world. Everything else can wait. Everything else will still be there. But right now, in this moment, you are released from all of it, free to simply rest, to simply be, to simply allow yourself to drift into sleep and dreams, and the deep restoration that comes when you finally stop reaching and just allow yourself to be held. Rest now. Rest. The light has faded. The darkness is warm. You are home.